think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
Hello and welcome to Chaos Shamanism. I'm the clairsentient psychonaut. Now in this episode, when it comes to recounting my spiritual path and so-called paranormal experiences, I was wondering when in my life to start. And I decided to go all the way back to 2006, before I made contact with spirits. I was experiencing a sort of crisis in my life as a growing apocalypse panic was accompanied by various health problems. In those days, I couldn't turn the TV on without being bombarded by information claiming that modern civilization was bound to collapse soon. For example, I saw some silly documentary about a biblical prediction claiming that the end of civilization was about to occur, beginning with a conflict in the Middle East started by Israel, which would happen in the summer of 2006. That time came, and sure enough, in July, the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah war began. If you remember, the Bush administration was making very irresponsible statements that it was the beginning of World War III. So, in my panic-addled mind, it seemed that the apparent prophecy just may somehow be true, and that World War III was about to arrive and destroy modern civilization. Like I said earlier, I couldn't turn on the TV without being told that it was the end of the damn world. Whether it was World War III, a solar flare that would destroy all electronic devices and systems, or the magnetic poles of the Earth undergoing a catastrophic reversal. Every day I was told that it was the end. I mean, it was so bad that I stopped watching TV to avoid the never-ending assault, but anywhere I went in public, someone was talking about how it was the end of the damn world. I remember one specific instance of the guy at the register of Chipotle ringing up my trio of soft tacos, looking into my eyes and saying, like he was a character in some goddamned Hollywood thriller, "You do realize that it is the end of the world, the apocalypse, do you not, my friend?" You know, and this was all accompanied by a building list of physical problems. I mean, my feet began to hurt, my legs felt detached and strange, to the point where I had difficulty walking correctly. I would often find myself in a strange, otherworldly daze, and worst of all, I began to see little points of light when I closed my eyes, firing off like tiny fireworks behind my eyelids. I became convinced that I had some kind of horrible neurological disorder or brain tumor. I became utterly consumed by panic and dread. I drank myself to sleep every night with bottles of cheap vodka, as closing my eyes to sleep revealed those damn lights again, sending me into a panic that kept me from falling asleep. It was amid this terror and turmoil, I decided to do something which I had been putting off for years. Dive headfirst into researching religion, atheism, and eventually the occult. I just felt, hey, if this is the end of my life, I want to know what the hell is going on here. Or at least get some idea. Alright, I'll continue this story after this next segment.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
30th August, 1921, London Evening News. A child with a wolf's head born in Avignon, France. He died within 5 days. The news says he also had lobster claws in place of hands. The 10th of June, 1933, London Sunday Dispatch, a cat with wings. It was allegedly found by Mrs. Hughes Griffith of Somerstown, Oxford. Mrs. Griffith allegedly took it to Mr. Frank Owen, allegedly of the Oxford Zoo, who allegedly examined it and allegedly decided the wings were real. There is a photo of the winged cat with a story. Fortean Times, number 34, summer 1981. A letter from Sid Birchby, who recalls that damned winged cat in Oxford in 1933. Mr. Birchby says that the zookeeper pronounced the wings were real, but the cat could not fly. Mr. Birchby also tells of a second winged cat reported on the 23rd of September, 1975, in the Manchester Evening News. This one was originally found as a kitten, and the wings took a year to develop fully, whereupon they allegedly measured 11 inches from shoulder to tip. 19th December, 1932, London Evening Standard. A girl with 2 heads, born 6 weeks earlier, was being studied at the Soviet Institute of Experimental Medicine in Leningrad. 19th April, 1931, London Evening News. Inquest on one John Charles Clark. The coroner allegedly said that the alleged Clark's blood was black, quoting, coal black, of the consistency of tar, were his words. 25th May, 1889, Toronto Globe. Reports from Simcoe, Ontario, claiming that a cow on the farm of Mr. John H. Carter had given birth to a calf and 2 lambs. This is more awful to the experts than to ordinary readers. As Charles Fort commented, it would not be more repugnant to biological orthodoxy if the damned cow had given birth to a calf and 2 bicycles. The Globe sent a reporter to the scene. The reporter said he examined the blasphemous brood, and 2 out of 3 of them were definitely lambs but had cow-like hair on their breasts instead of wool. On the 25th of May, 1889, the Daily Mercury of Quebec sent their own reporter to Simcoe. He also alleges that he saw the same high crime against revealed law with his own eyes.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out of you.
Alright, now I had been raised Protestant Christian, but had never been able to accept the strong beliefs of my family and friends. I didn't yet fully reject Christianity, though I never really believed, but I also had not fully embraced atheistic materialism either. At this point of what seemed to be the end of my life, I decided to throw all caution aside. I read the New Testament all the way through, debated Christian beliefs with my parents, and read the writings of atheists and anti-religious thinkers. Over time, and through gaining more knowledge, I realized how silly all of the apocalypse panic was. That August, the United Nations brokered a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, ending the grip of panic that the news media, government, and general populace had cast over me. I saw doctors about the lights in my eyes, and they told me that it was most definitely just a slight tearing in the back of my eyeball, and was nothing to worry about. I also discovered that my weak legs and painful feet were a byproduct of anxiety, specifically a reaction to a buildup of too much oxygen, which results from the mild hyperventilation associated with constant anxiety. The fear was gone, but what remained was an opening of my eyes to larger matters, spiritual, existential, and metaphysical, and also a yearning to learn more about perspectives of reality that played neither the Christian game or the atheist game. The only two realities many people in our culture are allowed to accept at all. I was determined to learn about this mysterious collection of things known as the occult. The initiation of suffering was complete, and I was ready to go to school. Little did I know that I'd also be going to war.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed. She went into an alternate dimension.
This excerpt is from an article written by Daniel Pinchbeck in February 2007 called The Open Hand. My perspective is that we are experiencing an accelerated evolution of human consciousness. Right now, we find ourselves in an awkward transition between steadier states. For the last centuries, a limited form of scientific rationality ruled the modern world, a mindset that denied intuitive thought and saw nature as an enemy to be conquered. We developed technologies that embodied our sense of alienation and isolation. Many of us are now reaching a different perspective. As we make connections between quantum physics and Eastern mysticism, we realize we live in a participatory universe with no place for an objective observer. Intuition is not irrational, but irrational. It is the way our mind processes the overload of information that doesn't enter our conscious filter. My own quest for understanding led me from being a somewhat embittered New York journalist to hitting a massive spiritual crisis in the late 1990s. In the throes of existential despair, I remembered my psychedelic experiences from college and decided to pursue the subject as a journalist. I took an assignment to undergo a tribal initiation in Gabon in West Africa, where I ate a visionary root bark, iboga, also known as ibogaine. I traveled to the Amazon in Ecuador to drink ayahuasca, a hallucinatory potion, with the Sequoia Indians, and visited the Mazatecs in Mexico, who preserve a sacred culture using mushrooms. The results of these investigations, and more, are recorded in my first book, Breaking Open the Head, which described my shift over time from cynical materialism to an acceptance of other dimensions and occult aspects of the psyche. By the end, I had plunged into Carl Jung, Rudolf Steiner, Walter Benjamin, Carlos Castaneda, and many more, in an attempt to figure out what was going on. It has been exactly 40 years since the heyday of the 1960s. That epoch could be viewed as an attempted voyage of initiation for the modern world. Today, we have embarked upon a new phase of the initiatory journey begun a generation ago, with the opportunity to avoid the tactical mistakes, strident statements, and polarizations of the past. Increasing numbers of people pursue spiritual practices, such as yoga and shamanism, with disciplined intensity. All right, I'm going to read a writing by Brian Inglis, which is taken from the book Mysteries of Mind, Space, and Time, Volume 1. By its very nature, the world of psychical research gives rise to astonishing claims and bitter accusations of fraud. Perhaps a little skepticism is a healthy thing, but, maintains Brian Inglis, it can become so obsessive that it is a form of mental disorder, stopping the sufferer from seeing the world as it really is. The term skeptic is commonly used, in the context of parapsychology, about anybody who declines to accept that paranormal phenomenon exist. But skepticism takes a number of different forms, and some of them border on mental disorder. Like mental disorders, they can be categorized, although, being the product of confusion, they are often themselves mixed up. Skeptics on the extreme, or rationalist wing, argue simply that there are certain laws of nature that cannot be broken, and proceed from there to dismiss, say, extrasensory perception and psychokinesis, on the grounds that a mind cannot communicate with another mind, let alone affect matter, because this would break the laws. The great von Helmholtz, physicist and physiologist, told Sir William Barrett that, as he could not accept the possibility that thought could be transmitted between one person and another, independently of the recognized channels of sensation, he would decline to believe in telepathy even on the testimony of the entire body of members of the Royal Society. This line of argument has become untenable, however, largely owing to the discoveries of the quantum physicists. They have found that nuclear particles communicate at a distance, without having any recognized channels of sensation, and that they also indulge in translocation. They can move from one orbit to another without, apparently, traversing the intervening space. It can, of course, be claimed that what happens at the level of the electron or neutrino is not necessarily applicable to human beings, but it cannot now be claimed that communication at a distance and translocation are contrary to the laws of nature. There has consequently been a shift recently to a different type of rationalism, based on the teachings of the 18th century Scots philosopher David Hume. Hume did not assert that supernatural, as they were still described, phenomenon were a priori impossible because they broke natural laws. Rather, he argued, they were impossible because the laws of nature were themselves based on the firm and unalterable experience of mankind. Men must die, lead cannot float in the air, fire consumes wood. It would be miraculous if anybody became immortal, if lead floated, or if wood became incombustible. But these things never happen, and, as a uniform experience amounts to a proof, here was proof against the existence of any miracle, in his words. Hume remains a kind of secular patron saint of rationalists, yet the absurdity of his thesis ought to be obvious. Before magnetism was discovered, it could just as readily have been argued that iron could not float, yet with the help of a magnet, iron actually levitates. In any case, there are tens of thousands of reports of quote-unquote miracles of various kinds. It is possible to assert that they are all bogus, but it cannot be asserted that they are actually contrary to human experience. Today, telepathic communication is deemed a very common experience, to judge from opinion polls, and may be explained away with the help of all the stock rationalizations, coincidence, wishful thinking, and so on. But the sheer weight of evidence is beginning to make such rationalizations look distinctly shop-soiled. As a result, skeptics of this type are also becoming an endangered species. There is C.E.M. Hansel, professor of psychology at the University of Swansea, whose books on ESP represent the most detailed exposition of the rationalist case, and there is Nicholas Walter, the tireless campaigner on behalf of the Rationalist/Humanist Alliance, who must hold the record for letters to newspapers rallying the faithful to the cause. But with the possible exception of Sir Freddie Ayer, they now have no famous names on their side, no more Bertrand Russells. By far the largest category of skeptics is composed of individuals who accept, in theory, that paranormal phenomenon may exist, but who do not accept them in practice. For that matter, it is far from uncommon in the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, in which there are a number of members who regard it as their major function to show that evidence for ESP or PK, whether anecdotal or obtained in laboratory experiments, is flawed. The still common view of the SPR as a home for nutty academics who have been conned or have conned themselves into becoming believers in the paranormal could hardly be further from reality. Even those members who tacitly accept the existence of, say, telepathy or metal bending, often themselves suffer from marked symptoms of skepticism. These symptoms overlap and interact, but for convenience they can be put under three main headings, the first of which I have dubbed skepticemia. Some psychical researchers are so far gone that they have never been able to bring themselves to accept any case that they have been involved with as genuine. This applies particularly to poltergeist hauntings, as there is always the risk that somebody is playing practical jokes. The temptation is to find an excuse to bring in a negative verdict and leave. The second symptom, retrocognitive dissonance, is a more subtle version of the first. Time and again, investigators who have accepted a haunting or the results of a telepathy experiment or the genuineness of a medium have backed away later when the initial impact has receded, and they begin to wonder whether they might not have been duped after all. The third symptom has become increasingly common since the mid-20th century, proto-politis. Basically, this means a refusal to accept any evidence for the paranormal except those results that have been obtained in laboratory work, with strict protocols organized in advance and rigorous controls employed. This effectively wipes out the great bulk of the historical evidence for psychical phenomena. Taken together, these three have had a powerfully destructive effect on psychical research. And throughout the SPR's history, it is possible to argue that much of its best work has been in demolition rather than in construction. Skepticism breeds confusion in two main ways. One is to create alarm about the possibility of reason being overturned by a quote-unquote black tide of mud, as Sigmund Freud described the paranormal. Freud accepted the reality of telepathy, but he feared a revival of superstition, black magic, and the like. Skeptics trade on this, warning that to accept telepathy may be the thin end of the anti-rationalist wedge. The most fervent allies of skepticism, though, are conjurers who realize they would be upstaged by real magicians. The egregious James Randi has even arranged for bogus psychics to disrupt psychical research projects by using tricks. What would scientists who applaud this kind of deception think if a psychical researcher wrecked their experiments by, say, mixing up test tubes when they were not looking? That article was written in 1992. Disinfo.com. Religion, Atheism, and Dogmatic Thinking, posted by Andrew Dilks, June 18, 2013. Someone recently asked, should the oppressive content of monotheistic religions be respected and left alone, or challenged and questioned? It's a loaded question which, needless to say, provoked a lively debate on the nature of religion as a force for oppression and negativity in the world today. As one person expressed it, Christianity is a restrictive, damaging, violent, oppressive, totalitarian, hypocritical, patriarchal cult that has caused 2,000 years of pain, suffering, and misery to countless millions. It's not hard to see why so many people think this way. Religious wars and persecution have, over the centuries, killed untold millions. The tenets of Holy Scriptures used as a justification for a litany of crimes against humanity, from the Crusades in the Near East and the conquest of the New World and subsequent genocide of indigenous population to the horrific Inquisition and the frequent slaughter of heathens in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Today, religious institutions continue to come under intense criticism, often completely justified, as is the case with the ongoing scandals of child abuse and corruption or encouragement of violent extremism, something fundamentalist Christians are as guilty of as their fundamentalist Islamic counterparts. Judaism, too, is often deliberately equated with Zionism, in order to absolve the state of Israel any culpability for its crimes against humanity committed against the Palestinian people and other Arab neighbors. The considerable atheist backlash against religious organizations and their impact on the development of the species is understandable, and yet, ironically, sometimes their reactions betray another type of closed-minded dogmatism, one which seeks to deny that religion has any form of value whatsoever and should be entirely discarded in favor of a new ideology, a kind of militant atheism whose adherents set out to attack religion whilst propagating their own perceived certainties. It is an irony which is perhaps best summed up by the foundation of the first atheist church in London earlier this year. While calls to stamp out religion altogether resound with evangelical zeal. A legitimate response to the view that religion is a destructive force in the world is that the institution has perverted decent and right-thinking tenets for its own nefarious ends, that Holy Scriptures intended to enlighten and liberate have become warped into dogma and orthodoxy, tools of control to manipulate the masses. The ambiguous nature of these texts, the allegories and parables loaded with hidden meaning and symbolism, are, by their nature, open to misinterpretation and abuse. But while this may be true, to suggest that this quality makes them somehow inherently flawed on account of their institutional manipulation and therefore ultimately worthless is to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Christianity, for instance, has a rich and diverse history which denies simplistic characterization. Compare the Christian Gnostics or Neoplatonists with the early Roman Christians, where Greco-Roman pantheism still played a role, to the Catholic Church and the huge schisms of the Protestant Reformation, and it is clear how impossible it is to define Christianity as any one thing. There are probably more Christian denominations scattered around the globe today than at any other point in history, with an influence as equally varied. Few would deny that the current economic system is one of the most destructive forces in the world today, exacerbating poverty as the divide between rich and poor continues to grow exponentially. Loans made with excessive and abusive interest rates plunge millions into debt, an immoral practice known as usury. All the main religions, from Judaism and Christianity to Islam and Buddhism, have condemned this practice, with numerous references found throughout the Hebrew Bible, New Testament, Quran, and even the ancient Indian Vedas. Few would disagree that the world would be a significantly better place without the unscrupulous practices of modern-day moneylenders. The luminous poetry of William Blake, a religious man hugely critical of the church, may well be one of the finest examples of the reconciliation of the rebellious nature against religious orthodoxy existing paradoxically within the framework of faith in God. A man who understood that men forgot that all deities reside in the human breast, and sought equality and liberty for all. Heavily influenced by the Gnostics, Blake has been described by some as a visionary anarchist. Other historical religious groups have spearheaded radical political movements. The 17th century Diggers were a group of Protestants who sought to reform the social order and create a system of small rural communities based on egalitarian principles. They were to influence the San Francisco Diggers of the 1960s, the community anarchists and radical activists of Haight-Ashbury. Their influence was felt again in the revival of anarchism and the anti-road movements in the UK in 2011. Russian writer Leo Tolstoy's views on anarchism were pacified by his devotion to Christianity. In his 1900 essay On Anarchy, Tolstoy wrote, "The anarchists are right in everything, in the negation of the existing order and in the assertion that without authority there could not be worse violence than that of authority under existing conditions. They are mistaken only in thinking that anarchy can be instituted by a violent revolution." William Blake is one who recognized how the profound spiritual truths of religious texts were sunk into obscurity by the institution of the church. He condemned the sophistry of theological thought, which endorsed individual repression where sin bound men's desires, while at the same time excusing acts of evil and injustice. These criticisms still stand today, not least in the manner in which religious institutions often deny that any kind of spiritual understanding can come from within. The Gnostics and many others were persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church after the Council of Nicaea in 325. and the church ended up becoming self-proclaimed arbiters of spiritual enlightenment, whereby the average person could only encounter the divine through the medium of a priest. The pulpit often stands as an emblem for the spreading of dogmatic ignorance in the form of false wisdoms, subverting Christ's teachings with skillful sophistry to protect its own wealth and authority. As the mainstream monotheistic religious institutions continued to dominate and expand their global influence, dissenting groups such as the Gnostics were forced underground, where they would become a part of a rich Western tradition of esoteric wisdom and hidden knowledge, incorporating the occult teachings of the ages, from Hermeticism and the Kabbalah through the alchemy and the Rosicrucian Enlightenment. Isaac Newton, a founding father of the modern scientific method, was profoundly influenced by the occult and was described by John Maynard Keynes in 1942 as not the first of the age of reason, he was the last of the magicians. As well as being a practicing alchemist, he believed he was specially chosen by God for the task of understanding biblical scripture. These characteristics certainly cast a new light on a man who is often thought of as the archetypal materialist scientist. Newton ushered in an era dominated by the mechanistic view of the universe, which went on to exclude the alchemical and religious views that Newton himself considered of vital importance. Newton's broad-ranging study of the occult, coupled with his profound influence on shaping modern scientific thought, exemplifies the way in which freedom from ideological restrictions of any description encourages thinking with the potential to create new paradigms. Dogmatism, which inhibits these paradigm shifts, can be scientific as well as religious, as has become increasingly apparent in the recent developments into the study of consciousness. Graham Hancock's TEDx talk, The War on Consciousness, in which he discussed the role of ancient and sacred visionary plants in shamanism in our understanding of the mind, is a prime example of the negative impact of such scientific dogmatism. After only a short time available to the public on the TED YouTube channel, the organization removed the video, claiming the presentation contained serious factual errors that undermine TED's commitment to good science, and accusing Hancock of pseudoscience. After failing to qualify these accusations with any supporting evidence and facing an intense backlash from the public, TED was forced to backtrack and retract their initial statement. The video was uploaded in an obscure location on their blog, with TED maintaining that Hancock's views were well outside orthodox scientific thinking. For many, the expression orthodox scientific thinking lay at the heart of the decision to remove Graham Hancock's talk from their channel. The attacks on his credibility and the petty, unprofessional accusations, unsupported by any kind of rigorous analysis of specific details which he could refute, were little more than masks to hide what was fundamentally an ideological issue. TED demonstrated that they represent precisely the kind of materialistic scientific thinking which Hancock explicitly stated in his talk was incapable of dealing with the difficult questions of consciousness. A paradigm which precludes even the possibility of the experiential validity of shamanic altered states of consciousness and refuses to question the position that consciousness resides entirely in the brain inevitably greets such ideas with automatic ridicule and rejection. Yet progress is only ever made when orthodox thinking is challenged. The scientific method itself involves proposing hypotheses as explanations of phenomena not fully understood. In taking the position of the rigid skeptic in dealing with Hancock's approach to consciousness, TED, whose slogan is "Ideas Worth Sharing," demonstrated that conformity to established doctrines takes precedence over radical new ideas truly worth sharing. Just as the oppressive content of monotheistic religions should be rigorously challenged, so too should we challenge scientific materialism when it seeks to deny explorations into new avenues of inquiry which contradict its ideological position, as well as atheism when it calls for the abolition of religion and everything associated with it. But we should also recognize the positive aspects of different beliefs and integrate them in order to gain a broader understanding with the potential to surpass conventional wisdom, which, as history shows us, more often than not turns out to be untrue. As Einstein said, and Newton appeared to understand, everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe. A spirit vastly superior to that of man, and one in the face of which we, with our modest powers, must feel humble.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Alright, that's it for this episode of Chaos Shamanism. In the next one, I'm going to be continuing my story and actually get to the parts where, you know, quote-unquote paranormal things actually start happening. So look forward to that. Alright, bye-bye.
Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
The fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is changing. I'm already too far gone to know what to do.